whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm going to switch to gallery. Okay, good. You can hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Technology is great when it works, but it wasn't working for me this morning, but eventually we got in. So we'll call this meeting to order. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof? Hearing none, we will go to discussion, and we've asked the OPP as well as the Aylmer Police to be here. So welcome, gentlemen. And we will open it for discussion and questions. Okay, I will start off with the first question. Our township treasurer and our service delivery reviews indicated that we're looking at about $400,000 saving over the period of the contract. I guess my question is to the OPP. You've looked at that. Is there anything we're missing? Mike?
Thanks, Mary. Just obviously, I can't speak to the numbers that Aylmer's put forward. I can only speak to our costing and our billing model. And as you've received your current bill for the 2020 statement, it continues to be based on a base service cost per a billable property, as well as your calls for service bill, which is obviously submitted to you at the end of the year based on calls for service on a 4-year average, which, as you may be aware, allows for variations in calls for service. So you may have a spike, certainly with some particular crimes in 1 year, won't necessarily have a direct impact on your billing for the following year. So it's based on that 4-year average with that, which ultimately sets the cost. And as you can see by the $306.45 per household cost this year, that is within certainly the 2 or 3% that I believe Aylmer is speaking about.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Questions from council?
Yeah, I have one.
Go ahead, Mark.
I don't know if this is the time, but maybe to Mike. Is there any, say we did go with the Aylmer Police down the road, would you start charging us for extras? Because obviously we can't do everything for free. Is there any guarantee that we won't be charged for anything over and above normal practices, or I don't know?
Well, I certainly not in a position to guarantee. I know that there was communication sent out by the previous commissioner about, I believe, 2 years ago or possibly 3 years ago, indicating that the legislation exists for municipalities to be billed for use of OPP services. That is not currently the practice. We don't bill for those, I would just say, integrated response or calls for other services that the OPP uses. But I can't guarantee you that will or won't change, and certainly with the changes to the Police Services Act, I don't know what the future brings, but currently it's not our practice and we don't bill. I guess that's the most honest answer I can give you.
Thank you.
And just to clarify that, Mark, the contract that we're looking with the Aylmer Policing is a fee for services. So down the road, if all of a sudden the procedure changes with the OPP and they bill Aylmer, that has no effect on us.
But do you think Aylmer is going to keep taking a big hit if we had a huge problem for 4,000 or 5,000 a year? I don't know.
We signed a contract for 10 years, so I'll let Chief Horvath clarify that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, as far as the OPP services, and having worked for the OPP for 18 years, I sort of understand the billing model and also the specialty services. Every taxpayer in Ontario actually pays for specialty services. About a third of OPP contracts to the municipalities for municipal services. The rest of it is all paid by the province and every taxpayer in the province, and hence the reason that I don't think any commissioner is going to go down the road to charge for specialty services, because the Aylmer residents and the Elgin residents already pay for that service. So just to clarify that, for sure, yeah, if we were to look at frontline service delivery, we have to have an officer come in to do frontline service delivery from the OPP. they can certainly bill us for that because that's not part of the specialty services. But to my understanding, majority of the OPP costing in the province is distributed across every taxpayer in Ontario, and hence the reason that you wouldn't necessarily get into that. From my perspective, also you have to take a look at the number of times that service has been needed in either one of the municipalities. So again, it's a cost efficiency perspective that I don't have a tactical team. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to afford a tactical team to be sitting here in Aylmer waiting for that call that we may need every 3 or 4 years. But certainly the proposal that we put together for Malahide includes if there was a case where we would have to provide or requested a service from the OPP and they would bill us, that would be part of that cost. We would have to absorb that through our billing model.
Well, just to clarify, Chief Horvath, in the event that there was an additional cost from the OPP, that would not be transferred down to Malahide.
No, it would not be. So, if, for example, if we requested the collision reconstructionist and they had to assist us with that and they billed us, that would be part of that bill that we charge you for the year. So
Okay, thank you.
Included in that cost, yes.
Any other questions?
Sure, sure, Mr. Chair, thank you. So the way this is presented, there is absolutely no, I'll say, disadvantages to going with Aylmer Police Services, and there's only an advantage, and it is to save about $35,000 per year. So I'd like both parties to comment on that. So they're absolute, so because the way you've responded to the chart, and thank you for taking the time to do that. It shows that essentially we would be getting for sure the same service, if not more, because of the dedicated area, for a savings of $35,000 per year. Is that a correct interpretation?
From my perspective, yes, it's a correct interpretation. Given the factor that you have to understand the way, because we're projecting into 10 years into the contract, I erred on the side of caution and made sure that if I looked at historical costing of policing, and 85 to 90% is dedicated to wages and benefits, at 3% increase per year, that is more than adequate in terms of ensuring that the cost to Aylmer or to Malahide would not exceed that 3%, just because of our historical averages. And in addition to that, it's based on the years of experience per officer. So, for example, like we just renegotiated our contract at 1.26, 1.7, 1.7 for the 3 years. So obviously the 3% is it's not exceeding the 3%. It's 1.7% per year for the next 2 years for the costing of the officers, which is your wages and benefits, which again is majority of your factor when you look at policing costs. 85 to 90% is wages and benefits. So we're at 1.7% in 1.26% in 2020, 1.7% 21, and 1.7% 22.
Any other questions from council?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, could I have a similar response or a response from the OPP on the same question?
Mike, go ahead.
Yes, I think my answer has to be a little bit more broader, based on certainly what the costs are and what are you getting for your dollar. And I'll just speak to the services that we, the OPP, provide to the municipality of Malahide based on the calls for service billing and the base service amount, which will also address some of the comments made by the chief. I mean, certainly our costs, and as you're aware of the billing, the average increases have been around 2%. But I think the biggest thing that I need to maybe make a statement about is the deployment. And I know there's been some indication that that the OPP is unable to provide an officer assigned to Malahide Township on a 24/7 basis. I'd just maybe like to speak to our deployment as part of that response as to what you get for your current costs. Our deployment is based on a 3-zone model for the county. Malahide and Bayham are 1 zone in the entire county. On a daily basis, 24/7, there is an officer assigned to our 3-zone, which would include Malahide. And on, I would suggest on a greater than average number, there are 2 officers assigned to that zone with access to the, the remaining officers in the county. Zone assignments, and then the chief can certainly concur with this, is that it's an assignment. I'm assigned to a zone. I'm responsible for the calls in that server or in that zone, but officers from other zones may be called upon to take those calls for service. So I just wanted to clarify that point, that Malahide is assigned 24/7, 365 as part of our deployment model and part of what you pay for as a base service to us. And I would only ask to draw your attention to the comparison chart on the other services that you receive as a result of that. I agree with the chief that as Ontario taxpayers, we all have access to the Ontario Provincial Police assets as needed. I agree with that. But what you get as part of the contract agreement with the Ontario Provincial Police are the 61 people that are assigned to this attachment with various roles and assignments, including major crime, street crimes. We are a community mobilization officer, community services officer, and I certainly won't go through the whole list because I know you have it in front of you. So just from a billing and perspective understanding, these are all the services that we provide on a daily basis, 365 that have access to all of those other resources at a quick call without hesitation. And I'm not suggesting that you wouldn't have access to them, but if part of that bigger team, we have access to regional analysts as part of our deployment. We have staggered start times, so our shifts incorporate different start times to address peak times, which reduces overtime. And ultimately, our police services board has input with me, the detachment commander, to try and reduce the calls for service, to modify the billing over that extended 4-year time. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. I mean, we've had an increase in property collision, motor vehicle collisions over the last year, and we've been able to identify through analysis that basically those were car deer collisions through analysis using our regional analysis staff. And through that, work with the PSB to come up with a plan to address that. So I know the County of Elgin has invested $22,000 to put up signs around the county, which include 3 locations in Malahide, to help educate the public to slow them down for those collisions. Again, with a focus on community safety and ultimately on calls for service and billing for the people of Malahide. So it's not just this is the billing and we just move on with it year to year. We work collaboratively with the Police Services Board and the townships to respond to those needs. And I'm not saying or suggesting that the Aylmer Police wouldn't do that either, but I'm just including that in, it's not just the cost and these are the numbers. We're continually working to improve those and to reduce the calls for service, which would ultimately impact the calls for service billing model that we currently use.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any other questions?
No. Another question, Mr. Chair. Sort of following up on that regional analysis. So understanding that when you're trying to establish and trying to solve a crime and trying to establish a pattern, and it's not going to follow geographical or boundaries, municipal boundaries. And so perhaps a question for Aylmer Police in terms of what is the capacity to collect data and trying to solve crime and data. Are your databases between different police services with St. Thomas or London and OPP, or is it all interconnected? And would you be able to provide the same type of regional analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So we currently do that as well in our communities. We look at the crime trends and deploy our officers based on the crime trends, which is called the focus patrols. So if there is a specific area that we identified as area that is has high propensity to crime, then certainly we deploy the officers to those areas and make sure that we go through the crime suppression strategies and again proactive strategies to reduce crime. So we've done that for not only the crime perspective, but also for the traffic trends based on the complaints that we receive and based on the collision reporting that we receive. Collaboratively, we have an excellent working relationship with Elgin County OPP and also St. Thomas Police Service. Acting Inspector Novacek, she's on the CISO committee, which shares all crime reported incidents throughout the province. So we have that access to that information as well. So essentially, we very much work in the same capacity or deliver the same service what you would get with a larger police service, except that you don't necessarily have to have all those resources sitting at the detachment or at the station waiting for that deployment. And in fact, provincially, you know, if we were to look at saving money provincially in policing in general, a lot of these mid-sized and smaller services really don't require the tactical teams and those kind of things, simply because of the fact that deployment time for those units is not that great. If you use the service once a year, why would you have a team sitting in the office waiting for that one call when you have a provincial resource, probably the best in the country, if not worldwide recognized within the OPP service, that provide that dedicated specialty? So again, that's where the efficiencies come in. So from my perspective, as far as the deployment of officers, uniform officers to patrol the zones, we would have the north and the south. And again, as far as the additional resources that both us and Malahide would benefit from, as far as joint service, would be the fact that you would have 4 officers available, 2 in Aylmer and potentially 2 in Malahide. That would be of no additional cost. So if we have 4 per platoon, and all 4 are working, then obviously you will have like a what they call a floating car that would go and do traffic enforcement or crime suppression against the identified crime trends to be able to deploy them in that manner and respond to calls for service or any other detail that we feel will be beneficial to either area.
Okay, thank you, Chief. I do have one question, and this is in response from stations. I'm assuming that on a typical shift, there is briefings, there's paperwork, and often officers are responding from the station. What percentage of the time on a typical shift would the officer be at the station? And I assume it's the same for the OPP as well as the town of Aylmer. Mike?
Perhaps I could just speak on our behalf. I mean, it really is call dependent. There are some calls that officers are capable of, based on our equipment. Our officers all have mobile workstations where they can clear calls, do reports, they're equipped with cell phones. I mean, it's kind of the modern way of policing, and that applies to all police services. There's the ability to do some work from outside of the detachment, or there are some more complex investigations where if someone's in custody, where you may have to process a prisoner in the office, which would draw in an officer from any location, regardless of the service. From a deployment standpoint, in relation to the OPP, we also use community policing offices throughout the county. So in Malahide, we have one at the fire hall in the north end, and certainly our officers use the fire hall in the south end as well, where they can go in and make phone calls, use the office, basically use it as a staging area rather than returning to the detachment for non-administrative needs that they couldn't do otherwise. So it really is dependent on the call, dependent on their caseload or follow-ups that they may have to do, but most of that can be done from the car these days. I don't know if that answers your question fully.
No, not really. You've indicated that it depends on the call, but I'm looking at, on average, on an 8-hour shift, how many hours would it, in a typical day or week, would they spend at the station? percentage-wise?
Of a 12-hour shift, I would suggest there's probably at least 2 hours of what I would call shift prep and shift conclusion, where they would have to be at the office to complete some things.
Okay.
And again, I would just throw in that we used target staffing to cover those peak hours with officers who would work a 12 to 12 shift. So while the 6 o'clock officers were going off, there would still be officers assigned out in the county.
Okay, so roughly 1/6 or 12 or 14% of the time that officer is responding from the station.
Potentially. It, again, depends on the call. I will just throw out from a response position from the OPP. We also use what's called closest to the call. So our computer aided dispatching system in London will assign on a priority call. So if we're talking about emergency response versus just a standard call for service, it will identify the closest call in Southwestern Ontario, essentially. So for us, that would include Middlesex Detachment, Norfolk Detachment, and Oxford, certainly if we're talking about our East End. So if there was an officer in Tillsonburg who was closer than anyone else, if officers were tied up somewhere else, it's all based on emergency response calls for service. They would use the closest to the call. Otherwise, for what I would call standard calls for service, they could be responding from the detachment.
Thank you. I assume that's very similar to Chief Horvat with the Aylmer?
Yes, sir, it is. I would agree with Mike that anywhere from 1 to 2 hours a day is assigned to the officer based on the administrative workload that they have. Again, we have the same thing. We have availability of mobile workstations where the officer can do the majority of their computer work from the terminal in the each individual cruiser that's assigned to them. So yeah, it's a very typical response. Obviously, if you have a criminal case on the go where you have to prepare court documents and those kind of things, they would come back to the office here and cut those up. But again, you would have the availability of officers within the office based on our deployment model that would be available for any calls within Malahide or the town of Aylmer. From the ESO perspective, certainly that's something that if Malahide was to go down the route of Aylmer Police Service as their service delivery service of choice, we could establish an ESO in any of the areas that we can get an office and have the officer for the closeness and everything else. We could have that established as well. That's not an issue.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions either from council members or staff?
Yeah, I just have a couple, please.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Just a scenario, say there's a great big call in Malahide, say down near Port Bruce, and it's a bad accident. You needed more than 2 or 3 officers. Would the OPP then do backup for Aylmer, I presume?
Yeah, perhaps there would be, sir, and it's no different than what we do right now with the OPP. Like, I mean, there's many times that we get a call because we're closest. Again, when you're talking about closest to the call, if there's something that happens in Malahide and our officer is closer to, especially if it's an emergency, I can give you an example of 2 to 3 weeks ago, we had a break and enter in progress where they called us up. We came in, we arrested the individual, turned them over to the OPP for investigation based on the evidence that we collected at the time. And I mean, that's the cooperative effort that we plan on continuing on with the OPP and certainly St. Thomas Police Service. So if there was that need in an emergency situation where our resources were not necessarily available right away, then we would rely on the OPP, very similar to what they do with us as well. I don't have an issue, and I don't think the OPP have an issue with that cooperative service that we provide to each other. It's all about officer safety. It's all about ensuring that the residents are serviced properly when it comes to policing, and that the response times are as best as we can make them to suppress any crimes in our community.
Okay, thanks. I have one more, Dave, if I could.
Yep. Go ahead, Mark.
I presume there'd be a police services board. There already is one, I guess, existing now. Malahide would have a seat on that if it went with Aylmer.
My understanding is that yes, you would have a seat on the police services board as a non-voting member, similar to what you have right now with the OPP. In addition to that, what we've discussed is you could have what they call the community committee that either myself or Acting Inspector Novicic would report to you on a quarterly basis, based on the crime trends, based on what's happening in your community, and liaise with that CPAC community members.
Yeah, thank you.
Aylmer, any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, if I can just speak to a couple of the councilors' questions.
Go ahead, Mark.
Just in regards to certainly backing each other up, I want to concur with the chief that if officer of public safety is at risk at any time, the OPP will not hesitate to provide assistance to the town of Aylmer, City of St. Thomas, and vice versa. We all work collaboratively in the community to promote that public safety. I would just add that outside of that, I would suggest we have a greater, what I would call, capacity to respond to those events. Again, we would draw upon Middlesex, Elgin, and Oxford, and we do call upon Aylmer, sir, close to town. Anywhere else in the county is that one of our neighboring detachments.
Okay.
And as far as the Police Services Board and the Community Police Committee, Malahide is represented currently by Councillor from Bayham currently at this time, and as the Deputy Mayor can attest to, we certainly have a Community Policing Committee in Malahide Township, along with all of our other townships in the County of Elgin.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, Dominique?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You both have done a good job of comparing and showing how similar the services can be. And I'd like to sort of rephrase it differently and have each of you talk about what we would not have, because I've yet to see in my life, like anytime I've traded, even if with the best decision in the process, there are trade-offs, things that I will no longer have. So if we were to go with Aylmer Services, what would be 3 things we would no longer have? And either one of you can answer, and I have the same question. If we stay with OPP, what are 3 things that we would be missing out on potentially?
Okay, who wants to respond first?
Well, I can go first. Certainly, from my perspective, I mean, Mike talked about it. Certainly, we don't have the option of calling in officers from Norfolk County, Oxford County, Middlesex County, because obviously they're part of the greater OPP. But certainly to counter that, we do have a cooperative effort or a cooperative working agreement with St. Thomas. That if we had that call that required extra resources, I'm certain that Chris and I can work on something to deploy those officers down into the area, whatever the need was, until we get the resources in to deal with whatever call we would have. Outside of that, I can't really think of anything else. I know from the deployment model that I'm looking at, from the Aylmer's perspective, we are going to deliver a service that is going to, in my view, exceed your expectations in terms of traffic safety, in terms of enforcement, and in terms of service delivery in schools, presentations, VIP program, Be the Real You program, and those kind of things, which will enhance the service in that capacity. So I would say yes, we don't have the resources available like Elgin County would by calling in other counties to come in. And a perfect example is that I'm going to use is just a current situation in Caledonia, where they had the resources come in from pretty much everywhere in the province due to the circumstances there. I don't have that capacity.
But Chief, just to add to that, if there was an incident like the Banditos that happened several years ago, I'm assuming that the OPP would be involved in that.
Oh, absolutely, sir. Like, I mean, that's no different than if you look at the Woodstock, which is a mid-sized service, and when they had the homicide there, unfortunately, the OPP were called in, and certainly they have, like I said, from the specialty perspective, I don't think that there's a service that beats the OPP in the resources that are available to them through that avenue. But at the same time, again, that would be available to any municipal service simply because every taxpayer in Ontario already pays for that specialty service through their taxes. It's not something that is unique to the contract policing or contract within the province with the OPC. And I'm sure, yeah, if you had a situation like the Bandito homicide, I mean, there's no way that I would have the capacity to investigate that, and I would certainly call in the resources to do that. No different than Mike, you would have to call the provincial resources in to deal with that because Malahide, under the contract, doesn't have that capacity either. But they do because of the provincial entity and the provincial resources that are available to all the municipal services and those that are contracted by the OPC.
Thank you, Chief. Mike, any comments?
Yes. First of all, I guess I'll start right kind of with the chief ended off. Our numbers based at the detachment here, I know in previous costing were based on certainly FTEs and the number of officers. Our deployment here in Elgin County is based on the integrated service delivery model. So because we are the provincial, we're obligated to provide all of those things that the chief has outlined to a wide ranging area. So not just the County of Elgin, Southwestern Ontario, the provincial, certainly the province at large. So by having the OPP policing in your community, you have access to those resources 24/7. And I know we've mentioned a lot about tactical teams and maybe helicopters and what I would describe as kind of all the flashy and big items. Those are certainly the things that you hear on, you know, what's the big cost or a homicide search. But it's the day-to-day access, and I can speak specifically to Caledonia because this is my 28th day in a row of working and having been an incident commander there over the last 4 weeks. The resources, the skill sets, the abilities that the OPP bring to the table, not only from those large teams and items that we're talking about, it's behind the scenes intelligence units, the ability for people who are writing warrants on a regular basis, just the skill set and that training that's required to be the provincial experts for most police services in that regard, something that you have access to 24/7. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that big integrated response call. We might have a trend. I guess the best example I'll use is the past year break and enters related to the funeral service. I think there was approximately 57 that stretched Elgin, Oxford, Norfolk, the City of London. So, you know, we take that 3-person street crime team that we have dedicated our detachment with a blended team with Middlesex. So you're now looking at 6 officers who are fully surveillance trained, covert vehicles. We're able to respond to that, use the regional analysts to come up with a plan and to dictate where they, you know, certainly how they deploy and what they're going to do as far as their deployment, the access that they then have to our organized crime bureau, which is informant development, all of those larger items that go on every day behind the scene that we have access to. And it's not just done by the frontline member, it's passed on to those units that provide the support to detachment without hesitation. You know, certainly, like I said, with an officer safety issue or public safety issue, by all means, we assist the Aylmer Police on our frontline daily service and investigative commitment. Those things aren't there. They're used in the areas that we police on a regular basis. And I could extend that to our, you know, our ATVs, our boat. Those are things that we have at our detachment on a regular basis that we deploy throughout Malahide and throughout the balance of the county. So if you're asking me what would you lose out on, those are the things that you lose out on a daily basis. I'm certainly not taking away what the chief said. They certainly participate in crime analysis and have their investigators, but you just lose that bigger perspective specialty service that you're getting, that you're not getting billed for, that's getting used daily here by the detachment. We have a crime trend, a traffic initiative. You know, we can bring in the plane to our area and do some enforcement. We have access to all those tools on a regular basis that aren't added to your billing. And so you lose out on that bigger picture, bigger corporate access. And even from an employee standpoint, you know, we have a healthy workplace team, a wellness unit, as you're well aware of all of the news around the province about officers who have taken their own lives. I mean, our members have access to wellness programs. There's a new clinician that's going to be assigned to the region, so our members can actually speak with somebody to seek support, work on their own wellness. I mean, you lose that capacity from a corporate standpoint by going, basically by not having us. You don't get those things from us. I'm not going to certainly speak for Aylmer on that regard. And as far as staffing, because of this integrated service model, we are now part of a syndicate, which is something that's new. So if we are supplying bodies to Caledonia, which we are currently doing, so we're supporting that provincial need, we then call upon our syndicate detachments, which include our neighbor detachments, to support our staffing so that Elgin County or Malahide isn't left with sufficient staffing to provide frontline policing 24/7. So it's not only would we come to Aylmer, we can support all of our area based on the regional deployment that we have in integrated response, by all means. So I think you lose that easy connection with all of the services that we have from a bigger corporate standpoint. A police officer, whether it has a red stripe on their pant or a blue stripe on their pant, is going to be a police officer that shows up to your house. I'm just suggesting that what's behind that single officer is what the thing that you lose. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Rick, I haven't heard from you. Anything?
I think Rick is participating fully as the alternate in case one of us is not here.
Oh, okay, you're right. You're right.
Sorry. So could I, Mr. Chair, could I ask then to, again, for a response from both sides, because as we go for further public consultation, one of the ways that this proposal has been presented and characterized is that this is, so going to Aylmer Police Services is an increase in service level for less money over 10 years. And I'd like you to, because like I said, that's kind of the headline and that's being presented. And so I'd like you to respond on that. Is that a fair characterization?
If I could.
Go ahead, Mike.
I go back to my original comment that if the proposed improvement by going to Aylmer Police is an officer assigned to Malahide Township 24/7, that's something that you already get, if not exceeded, because as I had indicated, sometimes that's two, and ultimately the balance of the officers in the county are available at that time. So it is assigned. It's certainly an impossible task to say that somebody will be in a zone 24/7. I mean, having worked for the city of St. Thomas Police, have very small zones, and I may have been assigned one of those zones, but there was times throughout the day where I certainly wasn't in that zone. So it's just an assignment and deployment of members to cover calls for service, and certainly officers from other zones are capable of taking that as call. So I think it's just clarity on that point. Certainly I can't speak to the cost difference. That's something that's been articulated by the chief. But I would just like to speak on our behalf that the deployment is there 24/7.
Thank you.
Chief Horvath?
So from our perspective, again, our deployment model will be based on the full-time equivalent to ensure that you have proper coverage in Malahide. I mean, our numbers speak for themselves in terms of traffic enforcement. We generally the officers issue over 1,000 charges per year. Which speaks volumes to the deployment model and the fact that the officers are out there in the communities and are doing what we're asking them to do, and they're available for not only the proactive stuff but also certainly the reactive stuff that comes in. So certainly that is the model that we prepare or are prepared and are going to provide to Malahide as well. Again, the whole concept here is not to have two officers in Aylmer and one officer in Malahide if we have three working, but certainly it's going to be the cooperative effort between those three officers to ensure that our response times to calls for service is increased. B, that we do proactive initiatives within both communities. And certainly the visibility out there in both communities is going to be enhanced simply because you do have that dedicated officer, potentially two dedicated officers, because if I have four working, again, two will be assigned to Aylmer, one will be assigned to Malahide, and one will be a floater, which will probably be traffic enforcement or other initiatives based on what our priorities are to dedicate that to both communities. So in actual fact, you will have more than one officer dedicated to Malahide most of the time. In the summertime, it's a little tougher, but we manage that with part-time program that we have as well, which is factored into the costing. So, and also that efficiency level where we can utilize part-time officers for deployment to reduce the cost, so you don't have to have a full-time officer come in on overtime and cover that. And we also have, similar to Allegheny County, we have auxiliary officers available for community functions and those kind of things. And that's where the benefit is from my perspective. You will see an enhanced visibility out there. And I mean, our officers are out there right now on the outskirts anyways. And I mean, the traffic stats that they're getting out of there, just a kilometer or two out of Aylmer, where we're getting people that are 50 over speeding, impaired driving, and those kind of things. So I think you'll see a much more enhanced service and visibility in your community.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Anything else? Nick, is there any comments you wish to make?
Hello there. Sorry, my phone's falling. Just from the community perspective, one thing I think of that comes to mind is when people need a criminal records check, for example. The vulnerable screening side of things, you had to live in the jurisdiction that polices you in order to get that check. So numerous times people show up at our lobby who reside in Springfield, let's say, and then we have to tell them, sorry, you have to drive to Central Elgin where the detachment is for the OPP to get that check done. So the Malahide residents would have access to come to our station and get all that done. And then the revenue that's generated there as well for those checks, that stays within our municipality. So that's one thing that came to mind as far as something that happens on a daily basis. And, we do have the online version now as well for people to complete those checks, but they can still walk in our front door and have those done as well.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Mayor, if I could just respond to Nick's comment there.
Good.
All of the revenue that's captured is returned to the Services Board and reported to the police for those criminal record checks. And as far as the availability, the OPP has now moved to an online criminal record check, which is accessible to all who have access to it, obviously, throughout the county. Certainly, I can't speak to the geography and the shorter drive to the Aylmer Police Station versus our detachment, but just wanted to address those two items.
Thank you, Mike. All right, we're almost closing down. Brent or Michelle, any questions, comments?
Nothing from me, Your Worship.
Nothing from me, Your Worship.
Okay. One more time, Dominique.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious if there are any comments that our questions didn't address, like something that both our presenters wanted to speak to, but that we did not trigger through our question.
So just from Aylmer's perspective, we do take a look at the top 10 calls for service, and that's one of the questions that you guys had. And looking at them and also doing the analysis from Aylmer, I believe it was for January when we did the presentation to Michelle and Brent. They're very, very similar in nature, and even the calls for service per officer ratio is very, very similar year in and year out. So again, when I look at that and I look at what our needs would be by taking on Malahide and provide that service delivery, it is not much different in terms of calls for service. Perhaps your collisions are a little bit higher and the collision impacts are a little bit higher, but certainly from the call perspective, they're very, very similar in nature. And again, that just comes down to the fact that the communities are very similar. You have the same type of demographic. Yes, we do have a much larger call volume, but again, that's because of the fact that we're a more condensed population base versus Malahide. And certainly, but looking at the call volume and looking at the actual calls for service and the types of call that we would assume if we were to take over Malahide is very, very similar to what we respond to right now. And certainly from that officer's expertise level, it's not much, you know, they already have that expertise from warrant writing to arrest to the training that we provide to the officers. It's very similar.
Mike, any comments?
Sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties here. Give me. Thanks. Sorry. I guess one thing that we haven't discussed is the satisfaction surveys or certainly response from the public. I provided those numbers, and you can certainly, if you have any questions, that's something that was discussed. But I would certainly just speak to responsiveness. I mean, I've been very well engaged with not only the Council of Malahide, with our community policing committees, and responsive to needs. We've certainly participated in many initiatives, whether that was ATV, roadways being open to ATVs with Rob Johnson when he was working for the Township of Malahide. So I think that's just one point that wasn't touched on. It seems to be kind of the appearance of, well, the OPP is this provincial entity, but we're a local detachment made up of local people who live in Malahide. Our families travel the streets, so I mean, there's no disconnect because it's the provincial police. These are local officers providing policing to local communities that they live in and travel in. So I just thought that would be of value.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And just to clarify, we are looking at two excellent police services, whether it be at the town of Aylmer or the OPP, and we've had no problems. That's not the issue. Service is not the issue at all. We are looking at potentially saving and maybe response times. So just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that. Okay, it is almost 12 o'clock. Any other comments before we close down?
I just have one.
One more, Mike? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mark.
Chief Horvat, being that Malahide's more agricultural, more rural, more farm, would the Aylmer Police have to make any adjustments or any changes to service that kind of area? Because certainly the OPP is doing a good job, and I think they're sympathetic to a lot of our concerns, but would you have to do any changes out there?
Well, certainly, sir, I've worked for the OPP, so they do provide a great service, and I believe that we provide excellent service to the community. From the rural perspective, again, that's the adaptability based on the crime trends that we see, and oftentimes the visibility of officers, and that's the only thing that I would suggest, that if you have the visibility out there, you also have an opportunity to suppress crime rates. But by having that visibility out there and having that enforcement out there, and the officers are visible in that community, that's basically what drives down your crime rates and also your traffic collisions as well. Would there be an adjustment? The only adjustment that I see there is the fact that it is a larger rural area with more kilometers to cover. But again, the deployment model that I envision happening, and certainly in consultation with Acting Inspector Nolicich, would be that we have a north and a south in Aylmer, and then we have one officer dedicated to Malahide. If we have that fourth officer, we could be looking at north and south on the Malahide side. So your deployment model here is going to be one based on the fact that, hey, we're going to take a look at the crime trends. We're going to do the focus patrols based on those crime trends and those assessments that we have. And in addition to that, we would do the proactive stuff in the community based on where our collisions are happening, and perhaps look at reduction strategies in that regard. In terms of ATVs, I understand the fact that the OPP have those things available to them. But certainly if down the road, and I'm not opposed to it, but if down the road we looked at the a need for ATV patrols within Malahide, and we have to go out and purchase 2 ATVs, they're about $5,000 a piece, and certainly adding that into a $2,000 budget. Well, I mean, I looked at it in the OPP world where I did purchase 2 ATVs through OPP costing, and how much they were billing back to Norfolk County for those 2 ATVs. So let's say even if it's $10,000 a year per ATV, you could be looking at $20,000 itemized budget that could be added in, and certainly work within the budget that we have to not impact either one of the communities for that. But again, it would have to be identified as a need within one or both communities in order for us to look at that. So it would be evaluated on an annual basis what our needs are, and perhaps certainly with rural areas, and if we found that there's a whole bunch of trails that we need to patrol and have a dedicated officer patrol those trails, then we would look at that option of purchase. And every year there's always a savings within your budget. If you look at your annual budget and what areas that you can save, if I can save say $200,000 annually, that's certainly going to the Police Services Board to purchase 2 ATVs at $20,000 wouldn't be a problem. And we've done that.
Okay, thank you, Chief Horvat. I think we're almost closing down. Last chance for comments or questions. Hearing none, Chief Horvat, Mike, Nick, thank you all for attending. We've had some very valuable questions that have come out, and I think we've clarified our position much more than what we did at 11 o'clock. And again, I apologize for being late, but things were not working connectively for them this morning. So thank you all for attending, and I think our next step, Michelle, is to have an open house.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think there are a couple, I don't think we were scheduled for a 1-hour meeting, so I don't think we're up against the clock, in my opinion, but we do have to approve the minutes from the last meeting. And I think there's another item to discuss next steps in terms of public consultation. I know, Michelle, you can correct me.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, there's also a staff report that outlining the various alternatives for policing service delivery that this committee had asked staff to report on as well. So there are a couple of other items on the agenda that haven't already been addressed.
Okay, we are going to excuse Chief Horvat and Mike and Nick, and we will carry on with basically our township business. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming in this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, we'll go back because I don't have an agenda in front of me. We'll go back to the minutes from the previous meeting. Was there any errors or omissions?
No.
No,
So move second for those.
I'll move.
Jaguar, second by Widner. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
And yes for me. And Michelle, you had a report?
Yes, there is one report that is included in your agenda package. So it was a review of the various police service delivery alternatives. So the current legislation in the Police Services Act allows for 7 different alternatives. Staff did take a look at all of the 7 and provided some explanation and some narrative. I don't have a whole lot more to report other than just that. Certainly either option, that continuing with the OPP or moving to Aylmer, would definitely meet with any of those alternatives. So there wouldn't be any challenges in either switching or in staying. And then there were some financial implications that were outlined in the report as well. Again, there are a number of assumptions that were made with respect to potential cost savings by moving to the Aylmer Police Services rather than having the OPP. And again, because we don't have any firm numbers from the OPP, as I said, there are a lot of assumptions that were included in there, but there is, if those assumptions are accurate, there is definitely savings that would be seen over the life of a 10-year contract if you were to switch to the Aylmer Police Services based on those assumptions, and there are no guarantees on those. And answering questions for the committee members, I don't have a lot more to report. I think the report is fairly, it's lengthy, unfortunately, because there were a number of alternatives to review, but I think it's fairly clear.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Questions for Michelle on her report?
Mr. Chair, yeah, first off, thank you for putting that together. I think it's good to have the bigger picture. And so would it be fair to say that there isn't even a third viable alternative that we should even explore?
If you're looking at economical viability, then I would suggest no. Certainly there are options available, but not at the cost that either Aylmer or the OPP are currently providing.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right. Once again, because I don't have an agenda before me, the next steps, Michelle?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chair. The last item, other than setting another committee meeting date, is to have a discussion with respect to the public consultation meetings that this committee wishes to hold now that we have this detailed information from both Aylmer Police Service as well as the OPP.
Do you think it would be appropriate to have a representative from the Aylmer and as well as the OPP at the discussion? I'm afraid there's going to be questions that come up that I'm not versed to reply to, and probably staff are not. Thoughts, Michelle?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that if either of the principals that we had with us today, if they were available to participate, I think that would be and I guess so we need to come up with some dates and times. I think it's been agreed previously that the location, probably the only really logical place to, because of some of the existing social distancing requirements, the only logical place is Malahide Community Place. We do still have some limitations on 50 participants for the meetings. So we would be looking at having members of the community register in advance that they wish to attend. We can schedule a series of meetings, as we've mentioned before, to if there are a large number of people that wish to provide comment or hear the same presentations. But I think it would be advisable to have representatives from both services available. And again, it would be somewhat subject to their availability as well as to some of the dates, but we can come up with some ideas anyways and float those to the representatives and see if they too are available on those dates, or whether they might even be able to send somebody else that may be able to answer questions if either the chief or the assistant inspector aren't available.
Okay, so are you going to send out a doodle poll and to come up with some potential dates?
I can do that, Mr. Chair. I think what I would like to get first is a little bit of input from the committee today in terms of how far away are we looking at, maybe later this month, early next month. We want to be able to give the public an opportunity to be able to have sufficient notice and of course coordinate those meetings with the representatives from Aylmer and the OPP. I just wasn't sure kind of what time frame you're looking at, and maybe you can provide some direction that way, and then I can look at trying to schedule something.
Well, I'm thinking later this month, towards the end of the month. That would give us adequate time to survey the residents in Aylmer and Malahide, and anyone that wants to come out to it, and we would know our numbers. And at that time, we would know if we need to schedule 1 or 2 meetings. And that would give us some opportunity for council members as well as the Aylmer Police and the OPP to find a date that's available to everybody.
Yeah, I think that, go ahead, Dominique, sorry.
No, I was just going to agree because I think a lot of the community and the families are focused on going back to school and figuring that out. So nothing before the 21st or 28th of September.
Okay, I will see what I can do to schedule something for maybe that last week in September. And it would be evening sessions, of course, to allow for the most people to be able to participate. So I can certainly send out some potential dates and times, and I will canvass the Aylmer Police and the OPP as well for their representatives. The other question is what type of format and what type of information that you're going to be wanting to have at that session. So I think that's the other question that we haven't really had discussion on is the type of materials or presentation or information that might be available. How much information could be available beforehand that people could possibly see. I'm looking for some more direction from the committee in that regard as well.
I think the format would be very similar to what we did about the amalgamation. Council would be there, and obviously people seated, and they could ask questions at will. As I think we do need to have a sort of a synopsis of where we are today on the advantages or disadvantages that that are being presented to us, and but in a very brief format, and then we can circulate that among our residents, and maybe half of the questions will be answered just with our with the paper material that we distribute.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we should make the full document available again. I know it's part of the agenda, but as a separate document, just for people who want to see all of the details. But some sort of executive summary that would have a side-by-side comparison, which I think we should, before publishing it, we should validate with the two parties so that they agree with the way we've summarized or characterized everything. And I think just a summary with some sort of link, or if you want, you know, the full details, here's where you can get it.
Michelle?
Yeah, I would agree. I guess I'm just, there's a lot of information there, and I guess I would be looking hopefully from this committee for some more direction in terms of what elements you wanted really included in that executive summit. There's a lot of information in there, and I'm not sure which focus that the committee wants to actually take in that presentation. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Well, certainly I think probably the majority of the people that are attending will want to know, is there a savings? And is the service level going to be similar to what we have at the present time? Beyond that, I think most people are aware of the satisfaction that Aylmer has with their policing and the satisfaction we have with the OPP, but I don't think we need to go down into every detail on their response to every call and what that was. But I think we do need to present basically what our service delivery review stated, that, you know, there is advantages from my perspective, but I'm sure that people will be questioning those advantages, and that's why we'd have the Aylmer and the OPP there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I may, I think I want to reflect on it a little bit and propose a few key items just based on what was brought up today. I think what was brought up today did cover all of those key points. So I think there's a lot of emphasis on deployment, and so what will be the difference? And I mean, it touches on service level, but just a more detailed, even like governance. So what will be our say? Are there differences? I could see people wondering about that. So cost, staffing / deployment, governance, and then, yeah, differences in terms of services. There was that regional approach and integrated approach that the OPP talked about. And so that, I don't know what the label of the title of that would be, but I can propose I think we're talking maybe 4 or 5 categories max.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. If the committee members want to feed some information back to staff, then we can certainly look at maybe together comprising the executive summary and some of the information. The other question I would have is whether or not this committee wanted to meet again in advance of those public sessions to take a look at the final information and presentation, or whether you just want to, we can put something together. I can share it if there's additional comments and things we can do, without a formal meeting. I guess I'm just, like I said, I'm looking for direction. This is kind of new territory for staff as well. So not sure where the committee wants to go from here.
Well, I would suggest, Michelle, that we find a date. Place, obviously, is Malahide Community Place. The format, I'm assuming we're going to be having all of council members at the podium. And as far as the executive summary, I would suggest we have another meeting and you present the executive summary ahead of time, and we can critique it and either add or subtract anything that we think is appropriate.
Yeah, that would be great. Like I said, and if the members want to submit any information ahead of time, so I guess we will take a look at scheduling the public consultation sessions over the next few weeks, and then if the committee wants to pick a date to have a kind of a run through and make sure everyone understands what the next presentation will entail, then we can go from there.
Okay, this will take a little while for you to collect this. So is a week enough?
I would suggest at least a couple, Mr. Chair. There are some other items that I have on the go, and yeah, if we could look at possibly the week of the 15th or 14th, that week sometime.
Mm-hmm.
That should be able to give staff a little bit more time to be able to put an information together.
Okay, Monday or Tuesday, does that work for everybody?
Tuesday, the Council Remuneration Review Committee is meeting that morning. So either Monday or Wednesday morning would be best for staff, if that's still acceptable for the members.
Yeah, either one of those are good for me. Monday, I prefer. Monday's
Right.
good for everybody?
I think so. There is I think that the county's still looking for a date for a special meeting, but that was Monday morning was one of the placeholders, but it may not happen because I don't know that everybody can attend. Is Monday afternoon a possibility?
Yeah, Monday,
Yeah.
either one. is
Yeah,
good for
that's
me.
fine with me. I'm Councillor Widner usually has some challenges with afternoon meetings, so I was trying to accommodate his schedule as well.
Yeah,
Mark?
I prefer the mornings, but whatever we have to do, we'll do, I guess.
Okay,
I'm thinking maybe the later morning, if we can do 11 again, because I think the county was looking, I have a 9 o'clock placeholder.
Yeah.
11 on Monday? Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep,
I'm
that
good
would be
with that.
good. So that's Monday, September 14th at 11 a.m.
I'm good with that.
Great.
I see heads nodding, so I think we're good. So our next meeting is established. Anything else before we close down?
Nothing more from staff, Mr. Chair.
Do we need a formal adjournment?
Yes, please.
Okay, mover and seconder for adjourn. Widner and
Moved.
Daguerre, all in favor? Carried.
Yes.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Take care.